Evening, everyone. Sorry, the sun is in my face there. My name is Tanya Love. I'm Council Member Fife's Chief of Staff, and we're here with Council Member Fife for our first 2021-2023 budget webinar where we will have some guests talk about the mayor's proposed budget and discuss some of the priorities for Councilmember Fife this year. So I'll let Councilmember Fife say hello to everyone, and then we will begin with a little bit of an overview.
Well, I want to get right into it, but I will say for the people who are joining into this District 3 Budget Town Hall, thank you for attending. Thank you for being engaged. We have our work cut out for us coming out of a pandemic, but there's a bright light. Kristen's going to get into a little bit about that for us, but it's not to say that it won't be challenging, but I'm encouraged by some of the revenues that have come in above projections. I'm encouraged about all of the people that are really throwing down to make sure that we have a just recovery that's centered in our frontline workers and affordable housing and homeless solutions and real public safety solutions that reimagine what public safety should actually be. So without further ado, Tanya, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Great. So I have a brief presentation to share, and then we're going to have our guest speakers speak. So let me share my screen real quick. That's not the one I want. This one I want. And so can everyone see this? Great. So hi everyone, it is budget time. I know everyone's super excited about it. Or is it just me because I'm like a super nerd? I don't know, but I'm excited that it's budget time. So what does that mean? So budget time means that this is the period of time where city council and the mayor decide what they're going to do with the funding that they receive. And they're going to distribute that funding to pay for city services like trash pickup or building affordable housing or, homelessness or, public safety. So this is the time of year that we do that. I'm going to forward. Hold on. So we're what's called the 2021-2023 budget process. And as I mentioned, this is the time of year where the city council, along with input from the mayor and the city administration and staff, decides on the budget. Oakland's budget pays for city services, and the budget is decided in a 2-year cycle, kind of in the odd year. So that's why we're calling it the 2021-2023 budget process. It's adjusted mid-cycle within the even year. So even though they're going to decide how they're going to spend the money for the next 2 years, in 2022, they're going to adjust this budget according to 2022's revenue and needed expenses at the time. So even though they decide the budget on a 2-year basis, they update it every year. And so we are now in the beginning of the next 2-year budget cycle. So just briefly, I'm going to talk about the timeline. The budget process actually begins way back in January, where the city actually gives out a poll to constituents and asks constituents, either by phone or by mail, what are your budget priorities? What are your concerns? How do you feel about the city? At the same time, staff get together and they look internally and they decide, how is the services that were provided? How are we doing? Do we need to have more staff? Do we need more resources? Do we need to cut staff? So in this time between January and basically the beginning of March, city staff are internally looking at their budgets, looking at what's needed and what's not needed, and sharing that information with the finance team. at the same time, there's this budget poll happening, and that information is being collected and it's going to be shared with the city council. Also, at the same time, the finance department gets together and they get a consultant to come in and look at the 5-year forecast. And they look at what revenues might be looking at like down the road, so that when city council is making their decision, they're not just making the decision based off of one period of time. They're actually considering what things might look like 5 years down the road. Then in April is usually our tax time. This time it was a little bit different. We didn't do our taxes until May 17th, but usually during this time is when revenue starts coming in. And then we get more accurate information about what our revenues are going to look like. Then in the beginning of May, what happens is usually on May 1st, the mayor presents her budget proposal to the city council. And this year, that budget proposal was presented on May 10th. And now, between May and June, is where we're all looking at that budget proposal and we're going out into the community and getting feedback. So that's what's happening right now with this budget forum. The mayor's budget proposal this year was put online. So now we have this really kind of neat, interactive website where everyone can look at the budget. Everyone can look at how the mayor decided to make her expenditures, her suggestions, and people can dig in and look at all the nooks and the crannies and find out, what she's thinking when it comes to running the city and how to fund that. You can find this website here at the bottom, and I will type it into the chat. I think I already did. I typed it into the chat. So for those of you who are just coming in, look in the chat and you can see that link. I highly recommend everyone go through there and just look at the budget, get all nerdy, get your dictionaries ready, because there's maybe some terms you don't know like me, and learn how the budget is used. There are different things that will on this website that are really neat that you can take a look at. So for example, on the first page, you will get a message from the mayor where she just kind of narratively talks about, what her vision is for the city and how she's thinking how she was thinking when it came to making this budget proposal. There's also a page where it's a budget guide that gives you kind of the down low of, what is entailed in the budget and, some things to think about. Here is the impacts of her budget proposal on city services. So you want to know, okay, so she decided to put $1 million into homelessness. How is that going to impact the services that the city is going to put forward? And how does that impact the city? You can also kind of do a deep dive into the city departments and see what departments the city actually supports. You can look at financial summaries per department. You can look at the city organizational chart, which to me is kind of similar to this. So I think they should have combined that. But in any case, you can see the organizational chart of the city. You can actually have a look at police budget transparency information. We all know that the funding for the police department is a hot topic right now. So the city and the mayor decided to really do a kind of a deep dive in the transparency on the police budget. And you can have a special look at that. Here it talks about what are they doing to get public input and how they're doing community engagement. And part of that is what we're doing today, where the city council is going out into the community and getting feedback. And then finally, you can look at legislative policies. Our third speaker is going to go and do a deep dive into the budget book and the highlights. So I'm just going to leave it here. I want to talk about right now our budget poll that I just briefly discussed. The city put out a poll in from December to January 17th, and they talked to 1,862 people via the phone, email, and postcard. And it was pretty distributed across the districts, evenly distributed. And they had a variety of those within different races and ethnicity. But the majority, was Caucasian, had 20% Latino, 25% African American, and 17% of our Asian Pacific Islanders. During that budget poll, the participants said that the number one priority for them was homelessness and health and safety around homelessness. Pretty huge issue. It shouldn't be a surprise. At the same time, they wanted to focus on housing and affordability, sidewalk maintenance. They wanted crime and violence addressed. They wanted to do something with education. There was also kind of on the lower end, when you're looking at public safety, some people felt that, police protection was a priority, and others felt that maybe police reform was a priority. But here is a summary of what that budget poll way back in January said. At the same time, though, Councilmember Fife distributed her own survey. And there we got 1,227 respondents. Congratulations to those who did that. We thank you so much for your feedback. It's amazing. The majority of the respondents, about 60%, came from District 3, but we got some love and support and feedback from other districts, District 1 and 2, and also District 4, and some between 5, 6, and 7. This little slice, people didn't know where they lived, but they gave feedback anyway, so we appreciate that. The majority, the top concerns in this budget survey from Councilmember Fife was housing and homelessness, not a surprise. But about 11% also felt that public safety was important. Trash and dumping, illegal dumping, was maybe a little bit less than 11%, and road repair. This little white chunk was a listing of all kinds of other ideas that came underneath 0.1%. So the graphic artist was just like, I'm not going to do anything. But that's interesting. There's just a wide variety of things that people want funded, but the majority people are interested in doing something around housing and homelessness. And then we asked this one question. We asked, are people interested in reallocating resources from OPD? And the majority of people said yes. Some were kind of little maybe, about 14%, and even less were no. But the majority of people who filled out the survey kind of felt like maybe OPD has taken a little bit more of the budget than necessary. So with that in mind, as a result of the survey, Councilmember Fife submitted her priorities to the city. And again, because of the response, housing and homelessness is a top priority for her. Under that category, we want to do more to protect our tenants. We want to do more to build affordable housing. And we want to actually provide some more homeless solutions with our budget. The second category being public safety, Councilmember Fife is really interested in supporting law officers and other civilian safety solutions to help reduce crime. Other things she's really interested in is supporting city workers. We're interested in boosting up economic development, looking at transportation infrastructure to make our streets safe, and supporting our youth commission. I'm going to end it here and let a couple of guests come and speak. Like we said, one of the priorities for Councilmember Fife is looking at, homeless and housing. So we have a couple staff persons from our Housing and Community Development Department to share a little bit about some of their priorities. So we have Christina Munn, who's Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development, and Lillian Frank Falcon, who is their Finance Director for Housing and Community Development. We'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you so much. Christina Moon, Assistant to the Director, not Deputy Director. Thank you so much for having us and no worries, joined by my colleague Lillian Falcon, Budget Guru. So super happy to be a part of this conversation. Am I able to share my screen, or could I share a few slides?
You see at the bottom?
Yeah, let me do that and let me know if you can, if that works. I will do, hopefully I'll make it look better, sorry. So I'll go through these hopefully really quickly. I mean, I'm borrowing a lot of these slides from our strategic action plan presentation, which we just showed to CED committee this Monday and shared with some of the council in preparation for that. So the Housing and Community Development Department, absolutely, housing and homelessness is our priority too. And I'm really heartened to hear that the responses that you received about that as a priority for D3. What we've been focusing on is, with the limited resources that we have, what should we really focus on in the next couple years? Our director Shola Olatoye came in and a little over a year ago, and had kind of visions of doing a big strategic plan, and really we just want to respond to the current crises that we're facing, of the pandemic and homelessness and affordability, displacement. So really, what are the actions we can take now with what we have in hand? And all of our strategies, we want to run through our real equity lens. And so historically, our department has not really been rooted in data, and we're really trying to bring that to the forefront of our work, really understanding who we serve and how we target our resources to the most vulnerable in our city, as well as identifying how to expand the partners that we work with to include BIPOC partners. We've been working with Stanford's Innovation Lab, the Changing Cities Research Lab at Stanford, who also has access to data from the Federal Reserve Bank. And so they've been able to give us a real granular look at population change, financial instability, using credit score data. And so we have a longitudinal sense of how populations have changed and how people are moving in Oakland. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the Black population has declined and left the city, while kind of higher income folks are moving in. East Oakland in particular, over the last couple of decades, has experienced greater financial insecurity. And one point I do want to highlight is that moderate income residents have some more vulnerability to displacement, as suggested by the data. They've been moving at higher rates and kind of experiencing higher rates of financial insecurity over time. So that's something that we want to think through as we think about our housing strategies as well, the whole spectrum of income. And part of what Stanford has been working on, and this is something we're excited to share in the next couple of weeks, is looking at different indicators of instability and displacement, and looking at it geographically. And so they've looked at past data, in the last recession, what happened, who was feeling the most residential instability. And you can see on the first graph, you see the map, there's a lot of the deeper red, purple, East Oakland, parts of West Oakland were hit hardest by the recession. And so based on some of those same indicators, we're trying to predict, where are the neighborhoods that might be most vulnerable in the current pandemic, which is the center map. But what's been sort of interesting is that the results in actual credit data in the past year show that it's really been scattered across the city. And so you see absolutely pockets in West and East Oakland, but also kind of, closer to downtown. So a lot more to come, and continuing to work with Stanford on this research. And to round that out as well, the city has started a pulse survey. So really reaching out to tenants and landlords and just seeing how they're doing. How hard has it been to pay rent? Have you lost your job? Just what are people experiencing? And, a lot of East Oakland and parts of West Oakland did experience higher rates of inability to pay rent in the last fall. And so we will continue to expand upon the survey and intend to issue it twice a year. And so using some of that as background and continuing our work, we really want to center our interventions on these 6 priorities centered around racial equity. Really want to target our federal and state relief funding to protect the most vulnerable, really addressing the historic racial inequity in housing, creating deep affordable housing, really I can talk more about this later, but really trying to work much more closely with our human services department partners on, the whole like housing ladder and spectrum, and how we are addressing homelessness by creating more permanent housing and interim housing, preventing displacement of our residents, creating more opportunities for moderate income and homeowners, and ending family homelessness in Oakland. And our framework for this work is really around how we protect our residents, how we preserve housing affordability, and how we produce more affordable housing, the 3P approach, which some folks may have heard. And just a quick update on what we have been up to lately. There's a really robust part of our agency that focuses on anti-displacement and homelessness prevention. So just to touch on some of that, we have direct rental assistance going through Keep Oakland Housed, and we've been using a lot of the federal's kind of emergency relief funds towards that purpose. So really trying to get direct assistance to people so that they can stay in their homes. Similarly, Oakland Housing Secure does the same, and they also provide legal services for tenants and homeowners. And we've created a new community development and engagement team, and that's really kind of providing general information and outreach for tenants, as well as continued work through our rent adjustment program, which also actively enforces our rent laws. And another element that we're looking at is really studying neighborhood preference policies. This is something we've heard a lot about and want to really dig into in the near future, how we can kind of keep people in the neighborhoods where they live. Just quickly on the production and preservation side, there's been a real uptick in the number of units we produce. It's never enough, but you can see the breakdown by income, and you can see the blue, the extremely low, which is 30% and below of area median income. We really want to focus on investing in more of those unit types, and you can see the blue bar has increased over time, and we hope to really focus on that income band moving forward. And here's another way to look at that production. The annual production target is aligned based on the mayor's 17K plan. It's an ambitious goal for affordable units, and we're just catching up to that annual production target. But as you'll see a little later, it's just going to take a lot more money to catch up and to really complete that production plan. And so in terms of budget, the mayor's budget will look a little different from this. This is really our agency's sort of regular sources of funding. You can see at the bottom, there's some sources that kind of zero out moving forward. Those are sort of big one-time funds. For example, Measure KK, which is an incredible resource. We immediately allocated and invested into housing with that resource. And so we are seeing those units come online. But it's run out. So we spent that $100 million and invested in housing. And now, moving forward, you can see in the bottom line, it's our anticipated kind of regular recurring sources really drop down to around 12 million in the next couple of years. And when you think about, how we can use the resources that we have, I think as an agency, we are taking advantage of any kind of one-time stimulus, state money that's being invested. And right now there's such a focus on the state's home key program and direct acquisitions and how quickly we can create units. And so, as an agency, we're thinking about how we allocate our resources to really invest in those, rapid units that can come online, the hotel motel conversions, the existing buildings, and how can we make those into deeply affordable units, as well as not stop investing in our pipeline of new construction, so that production will still continue, but we still do have kind of units coming online in the near future. And so there's a lot of numbers here, but I just want to focus on the bottom line, which is look, we want to catch up to the mayor's 70K target in production, and to do so, there would have to be a lot more funding involved to reach that, cover that deficit of 2,200 units. And what would that look like? It's so big at 330 million to 329 million in more subsidy to really reach that production goal. That budget, as I mentioned before, did not include a lot of these kind of one-time resources, and I just wanted to list some of those below. We don't have those in hand yet, so I didn't include them in the budget before, but we absolutely would deploy them per the plan here. Just some of those is additional rental assistance is expected at the end of this year, I believe. More CDBG COVID funding, which really helps with tenant legal services, housing stabilization support, some production, some home funding that would really go towards more production, as well as more state home key funding to support more acquisitions for homeless housing. And so again, we're really shifting our focus to invest in acquisition and conversion preservation opportunities with half of our funds, and as funding allows, shift the rest into new construction to make sure our pipeline continues. But of course, we need a lot more capital and operating dollars to continue this work. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. We got a couple of questions that maybe you can help answer. From James Van, he wants to know, how was inability to pay rent calculated?
That's a really good question. I can find out and get back to you. I believe I think it's self-reported, and then you just have to demonstrate that you do owe rent. Like you do have a rent to owe, but I can check on the actual wording of that question.
Okay. And then you can just send it to us, and then we can, I guess, send an email to Mr. Van. Thank you. I don't see any specific questions in the chat. So
I see a question about FEMA, and that funding has not come through our department. It's coming through the Human Services Department, I believe. And Lillian's nodding. I think she's more familiar maybe with where that's headed, but that's more the kind of emergency shelter use. And so yeah, we can.
Did you get FEMA funding for building housing?
Not for permanent housing.
Not for permanent housing.
Yeah, and so the distinction is that we're really focusing on the permanent side of it, and HSD does the more temporary or shelter solutions.
Great. Councilmember Fife, do you have a question?
Yeah.
With this funding that we're talking about, the general fund dollars, the dollars that we're allocating in the 21-23 budget, it is the revenues that the city generates, and those are our the two funds that are our general purpose fund and then our restricted funds. But there will be housing money that's coming in from the state, from the May revise from the governor's budget, that will also go towards housing solutions to address homelessness and the 3 Ps that we talked about. The 3 Ps that Christina mentioned, I'm not sure, Christina, if you shared with people what that means, but it is an acronym that is persistently used in the housing community, and it stands for preservation of existing housing. So keeping our affordable housing stock as affordable housing, protection. So that means protecting people who are currently in housing so that they don't end up on the streets, and then production. And production just means the construction of new affordable housing. So the 3 Ps is something that you'll hear referred to often. And the money that's coming in from the state that is separate from this, from the general fund monies that we are typically dealing with in this budget cycle, are intended to be focused by the governor on the home key projects. And so that means putting people in hotels and motels as an intervention for homelessness. We can debate if that is the best approach. It is very expensive, but I just wanted to clarify that for folks who may be listening. as well, because we will be receiving additional funds from the state for housing solutions.
I want to give time for one more question, and then we can move on to kind of just the general discussion on the budget. Why is impact fees reducing?
I can start and maybe hand it off to Lillian too. That was our submittal for the biennial budget exercise in February, I believe, and I think we're still waiting for a final estimate of what impact fees are projected to be, and so that's kind of that was our best guess. You know, we had heard that development activity had slowed, and so collection of those fees were anticipated to also decline. I should have caveated that all of those numbers, of course, are subject to this budget conversation that is happening with council and the public and mayor. So, you know, this is all probably going to adjust, right? So that was a best guess. Lillian, anything to add there?
Excuse me. Thank you, Christina. Yes, you're absolutely right. The decline, as newer, I just joined this department for 6 months. So if the information I provided here, just hopefully a little bit lenient. So the decline of the impact fee is largely, my understanding is that caused by the COVID, the situation, pandemic that led to the reduced construction in this area. And I also, as a fiscal manager of this department, seeing an increased refund of fees because, the builders, developers are not able to commit it to the original construction as planned. As a result, according to certain, laws that they are allowed to be reimbursed if they request discontinue their construction. So that also contributed, factored in our reduction, the risk. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, so now we will move on. Thank you, Christina and Lillian, for joining. So now we will move forward with, I'm sorry, Councilmember Fife.
I just wanted to thank Christina and Lillian and the folks at HCB. One of the solutions that we created, you all weren't there at the time, but it's still your department, to address some of the issues that people were experiencing to stop them from becoming homeless in the first place, was a deep partnership with the Housing and Community Development Department and President Bass's office, where we were able to secure a fund in order to purchase homes that would otherwise have been sold and the tenants would have had to move. So they were able to stay in place and continue to live in their housing with this project that we did with HCD. I want to thank you all, because we're going to have to come up with a lot more creative solutions like we did then in order to make sure that Oakland residents get to stay and age in place. So thank you for everything that you've done, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Same as well. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So now we have Kristen Schumacher, who will give us a presentation on the mayor's proposed budget. Take it away, Kristen.
Thanks, Tanya. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to try to share my screen. Hold on. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Kristen. I'm with IFPT Local 21. We are one of the labor unions that represents city employees in Oakland. We represent about 1,000 city employees, and we also work in coalition with some of our other union siblings in SEIU, which represents about 3,000 city employees, the firefighters, electricians, and CMEA, which is the union that represents some supervisors in the city. And the reason I'm here is because I do budget and policy research for our union. So I spend a lot of time looking at the City of Oakland's budget, and I'm going to do an overview of what is in the mayor's proposal. But before I get into that, I actually wanted to start with, I know Tanya just did a great overview of some of the things that are coming up in the budget process and what is required in the fiscal policy. But I wanted to talk about what has been happening, looking back a little bit further over the course of the past year, because obviously this has been an absolutely incredibly difficult time for a lot of people in our community, and also the city's budget, of course, was impacted by the pandemic. And this will give us a little bit of a sense of where we've been and where we're going looking forward. So back in March of last year, when the state of emergency was declared and the shutdowns began, at that time, the city anticipated that there would be significant impacts to some revenues in the general fund. In particular, the hotel tax, which is called the transient occupancy tax, sales taxes, and a number of other sources. For instance, there's some parking taxes as well. And initially, there were a number of balancing actions taken by the city council, and it was anticipated that there would be the need for cuts. However, the CARES Act was passed by the federal government, which brought $37 million in stimulus funding into Oakland, and the mid-cycle budget was balanced. The budget for this year was balanced using federal funding. Then, at the close of last fiscal year, the fiscal year that ended in July of last year, there was a bit of a surprise announcement, though it's not actually that surprising. It's been happening for years, frankly, that despite all of these balancing measures, there was about $32 million in unbudgeted police overspending on overtime, which caused some spending down of the city's reserve balance. The general purpose reserve balance was still at the required level. However, we had significantly more than what was required in reserve balance at that time, but the overspending in the police department ate up a significant amount of that. Then in November of last year, it was announced by the administration, they released their first quarter financial projections. They don't usually do that. They don't usually do projections off of just one fiscal quarter. But given the unique situation of the pandemic, they did release a first quarter report. And in that report, they projected that the police overspending was on track to continue yet again for this fiscal year. And in light of that, the administration announced about $29 million in cuts that would be made across multiple departments in order to balance overspending that was really primarily just happening in one department. They were also anticipating that there would be some further revenue loss, more than anticipated, but the primary issue was, again, projected overspending. So while all of this is to say that while the pandemic has had, of course, impacts on the city's revenues, it has also really brought to light some of the deeper structural issues in Oakland's budget over time, primarily what has been happening with overspending that is unbudgeted in the police department. So then in January of this year, we're moving to this current year now, the city received about $10 million in funds from the Coliseum Joint Powers Authority. That was due to the settlement with the Warriors. That allowed some limited restoration of services, especially the services that had been cut in the fire department. And then in early March, the administration announced their projections of for the next 5 years. Every year, every budget cycle, they put out a 5-year forecast. And the projection in this forecast was that there would be a 2-year projected deficit of $274 million across all city funds. And later we'll talk about what the underlying assumptions were in that 5-year forecast, because that was then used to inform the mayor's budget. A few weeks later, the federal government passed the American Rescue Plan, which brought really significant federal support into Oakland. Originally, it was $192 million. We found out it's about $4 million less than that, but still almost $200 million in assistance to help the city get through this pandemic. When that funding was announced, the council allocated about $58 million of that funding to help balance the budget for this fiscal year, with the caveat that they also said that the administration has to still control overspending and report on their plans to control overspending. It's actually a requirement in the city's fiscal policy that if a department is expected to overspend by over 1%, they have to come up with a corrective action plan, and it is on the administration to do that. So the idea here was to not allocate stimulus money, but then still continue to overspend, that we have to use this to actually balance the budget. And so then the mayor has now released her budget at the beginning of the month, which utilizes all remaining federal relief funds. Her proposal utilizes all remaining federal relief funds, and also continues some service reductions that have been implemented since last year. And I'll talk about that in more detail and what that means. And then Tanya covered what's happening going forward and what the process is like. But to make a long story short, the deadline to adopt a balanced budget is by June 30th. And now it is up to council to make amendments to the budget and for the council president to propose a budget. So before I get into the mayor's budget, I wanted to first talk about some of the big picture stuff. Where does the money come from? And generally, where does the money go? So these pie charts are based on the last set of audited financials we have from the city for last fiscal year, the one that ended last July. And this is all funds, not just the general funds. I thought this would be helpful to start from here. So as far as where the money comes from, there are two general categories of money that we will talk a lot about and that you probably hear a lot about. One is general fund, and then the other is special funds. And the general fund is discretionary money. It's money that can be used for any legal purpose of the city. However, there are tons of other funds in the city, but the biggest source of revenue, and this encompasses both the general fund and also some of our special funds, but a lot of our revenue comes from property taxes. There are also a number of other general revenues that the city actually controls. Voters in the city have the ability to reform these taxes, which I'll talk about later, which I'm excited to talk about. But for instance, we have a business tax. That business tax has not been changed in well over a decade at this point. Big businesses, huge businesses are paying the same tax rate as small businesses, which is something that potentially could change in the future. We have sales taxes, real estate transfer taxes. That has been a big one this year. But also the city charges for some services. So like when you go to the permitting counter in the city, when the permitting counter reopens, when you get a permit, that permit pays for the service that you're getting. That revenue can't be used for general purposes. We also get a number of grants and funding from the state and federal government, which we just heard about from HCD, that department has gotten a significant amount of state and federal funding. As far as where the money goes, big picture, about 40% of the city's funds go towards public safety. In this case, this encompasses both fire and police. The police budget is significantly larger than the fire department, but then the other remaining 60% of the budget goes towards other services. One thing that's pretty key here is that of the general fund primarily goes towards public safety right now. And then the special funds are primarily dedicated towards all of these other services that the city provides. So we already covered some of this, but really quickly, the general purpose fund is the discretionary money. Again, that money comes from property taxes, business license taxes, the real estate transfer tax, sales taxes, transient occupancy tax, that's a hotel tax, as well as a number of other smaller sources. For the special funds, there are hundreds of them, literally hundreds of them, and they're typically dedicated to a specific purpose. And I wanted to highlight some of the major examples here. But for example, development services, that's the fund I mentioned for planning and building. Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Christina talked about that a little bit earlier when she was showing some of the data for HCD. This is a fund that is a portion of property taxes that used to go to the former redevelopment agency that is dedicated to housing. Measure KK, we hear a lot about that one. That is a bond for infrastructure and affordable housing. And that is typically, that budget would actually be more so in the capital improvement plan than in the operating budget. but that is something that is dedicated to a specific purpose. Measures B and BB, those are examples of sales taxes that are dedicated for transportation and street projects. So just to be super clear about this, I've mentioned two things. One is the proposed policy budget, the operating budget of the city, and the other is the capital improvement program, sometimes also called just the CIP. And those are two different documents that City Council is considering right now. The policy budget is ongoing services. Anything that is city staff requires ongoing funding and it's just the general operations of the city, that is in the proposed policy budget. Anything that is a longer term infrastructure project, an improvement to the built environment in the city, streets, sidewalk repairs, housing, a lot of that stuff is in the capital budget. Most of those are funded by bonds, which have been approved by voters. So now I'm going to get into the mayor's proposed policy budget. To start with, I wanted to, hopefully this works, but I wanted to just use an example. Christina actually went through some of this, so I don't need to go through it in a ton of detail, thankfully. But I wanted to show you an example of how to navigate it if you're trying to figure out how the mayor is proposing to allocate funding for a particular service. And I thought I would just cover housing, for example, HCD. So let's see. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. But if you scroll down, so Tanya went through this part here, the summary, the highlight pages. If you scroll down to the table of contents here, you'll find the departmental summaries for each department. So in this example, we are looking for housing and community development, which is right here. And if you go to expenditures, there is a couple things here. There's a narrative description of the changes that the mayor is proposing. And then there's a number of tables. So this is every change that is being proposed in the budget. You'll see FTE means full-time equivalent employee. So that's changes in the number of positions. In some cases, there are positions being frozen. There are positions being transferred between funds. So they're changing the funding source. You can see some of the supplemental Project Home Key funds here at the beginning. But this goes through every single change compared to the current year's budget. If you keep scrolling down, there's some really helpful summary information. So you can see here the mid-cycle budget, that is where we are at right now. And then what the proposed budget is for the next 2 years. And we'll talk about this more in a second, but one of the, as you can see, the budget is going down. And that is partly because of the state and federal money that has come through during the pandemic. And that money is not anticipated to be there forever. And the fact that we need to bring in more resources to adequately fund these services in a continuing and ongoing way. Then if you keep scrolling, you can see a breakdown of where the money is coming from each source. Like I mentioned, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund earlier, you can see that there, as well as some of the state and federal money. And then there's some other really helpful summaries. You can see like overall what kind of buckets the funding is falling into within the department. So I'll leave it at that. There's also the capital improvement budget, which is provided on the mayor's online platform as well as a PDF document. And you can go through that if you want to find out, for instance, what kind of projects are being funded. She's proposing to fund through KK funds. But I won't go into a ton of detail on that right now. Just know that it's on there if you want to see where that money is going. So to really start digging into the mayor's budget, one of the most crucial things about any budget is what are the underlying assumptions about how our revenues are going to do? How much money do we think we are going to have? So the bars here that get darker blue, this is the modified budget for the year that we're in right now. This $630 million assumption is the assumption from February of this year of how we thought revenues would perform this year. This is for the general fund, by the way. the mayor's budget is assuming that next year, general fund revenues will still be $630 million. So she's assuming that there will be a very slow recovery from the pandemic, and that essentially revenues will stay flat next year, and then begin to go up slightly in the future. The reason that assumption is important is because that determines the whole scope of services that we believe, that the mayor believes the city can provide. And that has really shaped this whole conversation so far. Today, I actually have some exciting news to share that is a new development, which is that today the third quarter revenue update was announced. Like I said, that $630 million assumption was from February. The administration is now saying that, guess what? Revenues are actually going to be over $26 million higher this year than they initially anticipated. What that means is that there might be substantial room for council to either allocate this excess money as one-time money, or to adjust revenue projections moving forward to fund substantially more services and restore substantially more services. So that is absolutely amazing news. The council was really pushing to recognize some new revenues that we knew were coming in, but there was a lot of resistance from the administration. But now it has actually been confirmed that the recovery is starting much sooner than they anticipated. So now I'm going to go through what's happening with each of the department budgets in the mayor's proposal. So in the first year of her proposed budget, these are the departments that are expected to see a decrease in their budget compared to the current year. As you can see, Human Services and HCD are the ones that have the largest decreases compared to the current year's budget. And a big part of that is because of state and federal money that came into these departments during the pandemic that is not expected to be continuing ongoing money that we will have forever. And that's one of the things that my union and our membership are really interested in starting a conversation about now, is how can we do things differently than we did in 2008 and start bringing in more revenue to the city to actually really build a more just recovery in a way that is sustained moving forward, and not just lasting for a couple years and then the funding and the services go away. As far as the departments that are getting substantially more money in their budget compared to the current fiscal year, the largest increase by far is happening in the police department, but also increases in capital improvement, and fire, to some extent the Department of Transportation, but the bulk of the increases are in the police department. And these are the numbers for the second year. This is how the second year of the budget compares to our current fiscal year. Again, HCD's budget is expected to be lower than the current year. Same with economic and workforce development and a number of other services. And then again, the police department is receiving a lot of the increases in the second year, as well as the capital improvement program and fire. So I wanted to talk about what is exactly the mayor is proposing when it comes to the police department. I'm going to talk about the two departments that have the most drastic changes, police department and HCD. So where are these increases coming from? One thing that is happening is that she is proposing to add a number of officer positions in investigations. And they're also proposing to freeze some positions in the department and essentially move money around and change things in the department. They're also proposing to have about $1.6 million each year for body camera technology, which is a little interesting because one of the issues with the negotiated settlement agreement is more so that officers don't wear the body cameras rather than that the department doesn't have them. They're also adding 2 additional academies for a total added cost of $4.2 million. And they're making significant increases to the overtime budget in both years of the proposal. And for these overtime budget increases, the mayor is characterizing it as right-sizing the OPD budget. And I wanted to talk about what that means. So what has been happening for many years in OPD is that they have a lot of vacant positions. They both hold civilian positions vacant, things that like what my members do. For instance, in the crime lab, people who do some other administrative work in the department, ensure compliance with the, or try to ensure compliance with the negotiated settlement agreement. They hold a lot of those positions vacant, as well as holding a lot of sworn positions vacant. And they essentially use that money as an additional kind of shadow overtime budget. And then in addition to that, they also historically have overspent. Even with that, the vacancy savings, even with their overtime budget, they still have overspent. And what the mayor's budget is doing is essentially institutionalizing that practice and making it an ongoing thing that is reflected in the budget. She's freezing some positions and then using that as well as an overall increase to the budget to just increase the amount of money that is set aside for overtime, the bulk of which is for backfilling patrol and for 911 response. And then what she's saying is that they will significantly increase hiring in the second year of the budget and increase the amount of sworn positions overall. So as far as what's happening with the housing and community development budget, I think Christina actually covered this better than I ever could because she's the expert in this. But this is just pulled from the mayor's budget platform. And one of the things you can see here is that, for instance, there is significant chunks of money coming from the federal government, from the state government, that is coming in one-time buckets, and that does not continue moving forward. And then also what that means is that there's a slight increase in staffing for the first year of the budget, followed by a slight decrease in staffing in the second year in the mayor's proposal. So, and this is also, I just wanted to touch on what's happening overall with city staffing. So one of the ways that the mayor is balancing the budget, because she was projecting that revenues would be very low, is that she's proposing to freeze almost 200 civilian positions in the city, non-sworn positions in the city. So a lot of the service cuts that have been implemented are staying intact in the mayor's proposal. For folks who have been following the city budget or following what's been going on with the city workforce, you might know that there have been hundreds of vacant positions in the city. The city has been severely understaffed for years, largely because of what happened in 2008 and the underinvestment in the city's workforce and underinvestment in services. And so there's no real sign in the mayor's budget that this will be turned around going forward. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about that. One of the things that we know is that this was a mistake to really make deep cuts that never healed after 2008. The downsizing, the dramatic downsizing of our public sector really put us in a difficult position when the pandemic hit. One of the reasons we had to implement shutdowns is to give our public systems, our public health system, our public services time to prepare because we were so deeply understaffed. And one of the other choices that was made in 2008 was not just to cut services, but also to not pursue taxing big corporations and the wealthy so that we could actually restore those services. There's two sides to every budget equation. One is revenues and one is expenditures. And in 2008, we made the decision to try to cut our way out of the crisis instead of actually growing the pie and bringing in more resources for community needs. And you know what, I think this is all familiar to a lot of us, but the inequality that has caused in the Bay Area has grown deeper and deeper ever since. Much of the gains in income in our community have gone to just the top 10% of households in the Bay Area since 2008. Well, at the same time, there were the huge crisis of foreclosures across the community, as especially communities of color lost a lot of wealth and income. And we are still living with that unchecked racial and economic inequality today because we've never really addressed it in a systemic way in the city. And this is what happened with city staffing. This is the ratio of city staff to residents since 2008. And as you can see, like, we are still living with those cuts today. We entered the pandemic with those cuts still in existence, and they are preserved and actually deepened in the mayor's budget as of right now. At the same time, Clorox, which is headquartered downtown, made its highest profits ever in its history during the pandemic. And also, just looking at one developer, CIM Group completed 621 housing units downtown and sold one single property for $420 million during the pandemic. So if we don't do anything about this, we are going to let this deepening trend of inequality get even worse coming out of the COVID-driven recession. And from our perspective, from my union's perspective and our members' perspective, we believe that this is our chance to do things differently and to start to invest more deeply in public services and turn around this trend of inequality in our city. And I just wanted to put a few examples out there of how we can do that, of how we can make corporations in our city pay their fair share for services. One example is that landlords, large landlords with over 5 properties, pay a tax that is 2 times higher in Berkeley and Richmond compared to Oakland. Another one, this is a really big one right now. So high-end luxury real estate transfers for these properties that are $10 million or more when they sell, they're taxed at over twice the rate in San Francisco compared to Oakland. Uptown Station sold this year and brought in an additional $10 million in unanticipated revenue to the city. If that sale had happened in San Francisco, we would have over $20 million in revenue from that sale. And then finally, a huge one is that Oakland's biggest businesses are paying the same tax rate as the smallest businesses in the city. And it has been that way for a long time as other cities have pursued tax reform. San Francisco has reformed their business tax multiple times since 2008. Richmond just reformed theirs. And Oakland is still far behind and has a chance to really make this right and make a more fair tax system that supports small businesses while taxing the wealthy. So I will leave it at that. I know there's probably some questions in the chat, but I will stop there.
Thank you, Kristen. You are amazing and brilliant, and we appreciate you. And before we get into the questions, I do want to say something that we didn't say at the top of the forum, which is this is a public forum. We are here to talk about the budgets and how we can grow together as a city. We are not here to argue with each other in the chat. And we're asking everyone to respect each other, even if we have different ideologies about what you think is right and what you think is wrong, where money should go, where it shouldn't go. Please ask your questions and focus your questions to the panelists, to myself, so we can get those answered. And yeah, let's figure out how we can get through some of these challenging times together. And if that is not something that you are able to do, then we will remove you from the forum. That said, let's go ahead and get into some of these questions. There are a lot. So Tanya, I'm definitely gonna need some help because I'm reading through a lot of questions and a Q&A. Okay, so these are still housing questions. Looks like there's 23.
There's one question that I thought might be a good question to answer. Will the American Rescue Plan funding and distribution be through an RFP process for those who are interested in creating housing for low-income individuals, or anything else that qualifies under the American Rescue Plan? And I think Lillian, I think you may be able to answer that if you're still with us. If not,
I'm trying to weed through the comments and then the questions too. But Kristen, I think this is something that we could, either one of us could answer, is when do we get the opportunity? When does Oakland get the opportunity to change how we tax businesses, the big businesses?
oh,
Yeah, next general election, which would be next November. And there's also the potential for other elections. There's a potential recall election, primary elections. For those, we can take special tax measures to the ballot that are dedicated to certain services as well. So we have a lot of opportunities in the next year to really change how Oakland taxes wealthy corporations and high income residents, mostly wealthy corporations and developers. That is what the city has the ability to tax.
But so we could do that this year during a special election if we wanted to, during a recall election.
Yep, exactly. It has to be for special elections, it has to be a dedicated tax. It can't be a general tax for the general fund. But you know, a lot of cities have passed measures that are dedicated to housing, that are dedicated to fire services, like all of these things that the community has really been calling out for. We could take any number of measures to the ballot if we wanted to bring in those resources.
So Kristen, can you just quickly explain to us what's a dedicated tax and what's a non-dedicated tax?
Yeah, so for special taxes, dedicated taxes, and special elections like the recall or like a primary election, one requirement is that they have to be dedicated to a specific purpose. They can't be purely discretionary money that city council could allocate however they want. Like for instance, you can have a tax that is dedicated to housing, like so San Francisco passed a tax recently. I mentioned earlier that they tax these super expensive real estate transactions at a higher rate. That is a dedicated tax that they use for housing. And it can only be used for that. It can't be used for anything else. And those taxes do require a lot of voter support. They don't win by simple majority. So we really have to go out and fight for those types of taxes to make sure that they pass. But it guarantees that we have revenues that are dedicated to what the community wants.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Hi, this is Lillian. Sorry, I was looking for my unmute button everywhere and I finally found it. So yes, I wanted to address Melissa's question, very intelligent question. So that American Rescue Plan is part of the COVID rescue plan for especially the part dedicated to low-income housing, ERAP. We call it Emergency Rental Assistance Plan. So far, the city, the department has received $12.8 million, among which almost $10 million have already been, RFP through the manner of RFP allotted to allocate to 4, I believe, NPOs. BACs, I think, let me see. Okay, so these 4 now NPOs include BACs, Catholic Charity East Bay, Central Legal, and the Eviction Defense Center. So these, and we still have some remaining that we're accepting RFP. I believe our department has a link somewhere on our department, the department page. I just the link sent over in our chat. You can probably find out. I'll try to find it over there and post it over there. But that's the this American Rescue Plan, and we are also anticipating another almost $20 million ERAP 2, the second portion. So we applied, but we haven't got awarded yet. The amount is really estimated amount. So yeah, we do have some good programs coming in. Keep your ears peeled, and yeah, we will. Thank you. That's a very good question.
Thank you for that answer. And so I'm seeing lots of comments as well as questions. So I'm going to try to sort through those a little bit. Kristen, maybe you can share with us a little bit. I'm seeing a question from Patty Hall. What are restricted funds?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. So anything, let me think how to answer that. So anything that is outside of the general purpose fund is typically called special funds or restricted funds. But just to highlight a few examples of the types of special funds, because there's a lot of them. I mentioned planning and building before. So permitting revenues, when the city charges someone for a service, state law requires that those funds can only be used for the service that was provided to the resident or whoever received the service. So like the permitting revenues in planning and building are an example of that. The rent adjustment program is fee funded as well. That's another one where that's restricted. You can't use that money for tons of different programs. It has to go back into the rent adjustment program. There's also, Oakland has a number of parcel taxes. So like Measure Z is a parcel tax that was approved by voters in 2014 for violence prevention. A lot of that funding goes towards to OPD, but it's supposed to go towards a number of different violence prevention oriented services. So that is and that can't be used as general tax revenue because voters require that that tax only be used for those violence prevention services. So parcel taxes are typically an example of that. And let's see, I mentioned the sales taxes. Like there's some county restricted sales taxes for transportation. Any sort of federal or state grant funding can only be used for the program that the grant was awarded for. So that's considered restricted as well. And there are tons of these. So I can't really go through all of them. If you're curious about it, you can look in the mayor's budget booklet. There's descriptions of the general funds and descriptions of the special funds as well. And you can see what each fund is for. There's also like the sewer fund, for instance, that's its own independent fund, not a general fund that can be used for any purpose. I think I captured most of the major ones, but if you're curious, you can read the descriptions of all 200 of them or however many there are.
Yeah, Kristen, you're absolutely right. This Lillian, as from fiscal perspective, I definitely agree. I mean, concur what you said. Very, specific, very great answers. I would say in general, what restricted is restricted by laws, by the council. All the legal that if you don't use that person, that way. It's just in breach, not in compliance, will cause later on funds to be reimbursed. To be request to be reimbursed back. See, I work at HCD. We receive a lot of HUD funds. So if we say we allocate those HUD funds to non-housing programs, let's say we use them into park and recs. HUD is absolutely not going to be happy. As a matter of fact, we received this annual HUD audit. If they found from this process, we would be required to pay back that use. So yes, just want to say the restriction really doesn't come from the city. Doesn't, we say, oh, this is restricted, that's not restricted. It's really coming from the laws, rules in exchange to pass those bonds, receive those grants, awards. So we are really tied with that restriction.
Tanya, should we go through some of these comments as well? Because I'm seeing there are a lot. Well, I'll just generalize. What I'm seeing in some of the chat is that there are concerns about public safety. I see one comment that public safety should be funded differently, but the money should go to public safety, such as funding the Department of Violence Prevention. The Department of Violence Prevention, we actually wanted them to be here tonight to present on some of the recommendations of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, as well as just their plan for curbing the violence that we're experiencing in the city of Oakland right now. They couldn't be here, but as we can see that things have, we keep funding, we keep putting more and more police on the streets, and it's not causing crime to go down. So we do want to look at alternative sources for what we can potentially do to address the need. We know right now that there are a lot of people who are without work, who are unemployed, who've lost their jobs because of COVID, young people who've been disconnected from school, libraries that are closed, parks that are inaccessible. So we want to look at ways where we can resource the community so they have those things that actually can impact mental health for the better, for people who've been indoors for a year, who need to get out and get engaged in physical activity at their local parks and libraries. I fully support all of the comments that have been made in the chat and in the Q&A, asking to fully fund our libraries and our parks and the cleanup of those spaces as well. So hopefully we will get to do that. And that is also through the support of our frontline workers who have not taken a break during the pandemic, who are actually doing this work, who are also understaffed, but under-resourced. So when we look at resourcing our city workers, from police to fire to the people who are keeping our parks clean, we've got to acknowledge that the people we keep resourcing are not getting the job done, right? And the people who are going without, our frontline workers who are cleaning up the trash and working at our libraries or just keeping just different buildings open, are not being resourced. So we have to, that's something that we're wrestling with. I apologize, Tanya.
I wanted to say, actually wanted to kind of show what is in the mayor's proposed budget as far as expenditures per department. So I'm going to share my screen a little bit. Okay, I'm going to show, I am basically, so here's the website for the proposed budget. I'm going to do city departments. Actually, that's taking too long. Actually, I'm going to what's called the financial summaries. And if you scroll to the bottom, you go expenditures by department. And you go to, it's taking a long time because it's a pretty deep page. You see all funds expenditures. So the mayor says that in her proposed budget this year, under all funds, 18% of the budget is going to the police department. Only 1.8% is going to housing and community development. Human services, only 6%. Transportation, 3.9%. That's in the all funds. If you go down to the general purpose fund is what the city council and the mayor has the ability to decide how they want to expend. This is the visualization by department. Again, the police department, 45% of the general purpose funds. What other departments? Human services, only 2%. Libraries, only 1.8%. Parks, everyone thinks parks is important, only 2%. And I want to go even deeper to look at other different departments. Going down. Look at all these little departments, and we have the police department, 45%. What about violence prevention? 0.4% of the budget is going towards violence prevention. This is her proposed budget. This is what she is saying that how our money should be spent, how our tax dollars should be spent. So I just wanted to give people that perspective and get an understanding of how we are actually spending our money and how we should really think about, reimagine where we're putting our resources into. What is our values? I'm going to end it there because I'm going to go into a lecture.
And I think we might need that, Tanya, because the reality is, you know, people have an issue, and I did not want to editorialize. I really want to get into the questions, but this is a hot topic. It's a hot issue right now because of defund, right? People are really scared about defunding OPD. And the reason that it's so scary is because we don't know what else to do when things happen. We expect to be able to call someone for help, but that help is not coming. And it's not coming because we don't have enough officers. It's not coming because we are under resourcing the very communities that need to have access to our parks and libraries and all the things that we just mentioned, affordable housing and good paying jobs. But if we keep taking away the money to be able to do that, we'll never get to a place of safety. We will never get to it because we're continuously defunding communities. It's something that's been happening to public schools, good paying public service sector jobs in every area of the public sector for years. That's what we call neoliberalism. That is what we call austerity. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do something different. We're trying to give the resources and make sure that the resources for our communities are there so they can have an opportunity to thrive, because everything else we've tried hasn't worked. What we do know is what I'm hearing in so many city council meetings. So thank you for all the community groups and residents who come out and say this, is that the communities that are the safest don't have the most officers, they have the most resources. And that's the reality. And this country has disenfranchised certain communities for generations, which is why we're seeing this lack and this need to resource them. And I can't say it enough. Resource, I can't say that enough. That's what people truly need. That's what our communities truly need. And when it's contested, I'm not even going to get into that. Tanya, I'm about to start lecturing. I'm not going to do that. Let's try to see if we can take some more questions, since we still have Lillian and Kristen here, and we only have about 8 more minutes. And so I see one question here from Joshua Simon that says, regarding economic development, why is the Cultural Affairs Department budget being cut? The city recently finished its first cultural plan in 30 years. The plan gives us an opportunity to promote local cultural economic development that benefits BIPOC communities. We have an opportunity as we emerge. Well, I guess the question is, why are we cutting the cultural affairs budget at this critical moment? Really, honestly, Mr. Simon, I can't answer why we're cutting the budget at this particular moment. I have not had that conversation with the mayor, but I do believe, as was stated in the economic forecast, the mayor and the city administrator believed that our recovery would be a lot slower than what's actually happening. And it's a conservative approach. Some might label it a different type of approach, an austerity approach, but the reality is it is a very conservative projection about what to do and how to engage so that we don't end up in worse financial situations. I agree that cultural affairs and the services that they provide are really critical, especially to engaging and drawing more energy, especially tourist energy, to the areas that have this type of development. But I can't answer why specifically with a degree of certainty why the administration chose to cut that budget right now. I apologize.
I have a question from Brenda Roberts. She's asking, can we talk about Measure Q? This is dedicated tax allocated to homelessness in parks. Have you or your staff reviewed the details of this year's budget for Measure Q?
Is this Brenda Roberts? Brenda Roberts, our auditor, the city auditor? I'm not sure if she can.
Our former, I think our former.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Our
former city auditor.
No, Ms. Roberts, no, I have not dug deeply into that particular measure, the dedicated tax for homelessness in parks. From my cursory investigation at this point, I don't see it reflected in the existing budget. So that is something that we have to do some more investigation into. And if you have some information that you would like to share about Measure Q, I would love to hear that as well. But right now, the funds are supposed to be dedicated to exactly what you're saying, homelessness in parks. But there's been some concern about how those revenues, not just for Measure Q, but also other measures are allocated to other sources that they weren't intended to be utilized for. So I will definitely do some more investigation into that so I can have a more cogent answer to your question.
and she says that she will send us some information on this. Thank you, Ms. Rob.
Appreciated, much appreciated. I think
We have time for maybe one more question and then we can close.
it's important to state, Tanya, that this was a lot of information, and while you're searching for questions, this is a lot of information to take in. It is one of the most important tasks that my office will engage in our tenure, and it's something that we're taking very seriously. But most importantly, we're taking your input very seriously, and how we look at the budget and where to allocate the funds and how to move some things around from the mayor's budget. And we did not get to answer nearly as many questions as I would have liked to, but we will answer these questions with our city staff that was here tonight to make sure you get the proper responses. And if you have additional questions that were not listed here, please email us at district3@oaklandca.gov. That is District 3, the number 3, at oaklandca.gov, and we'll incorporate your questions and answers into our response.
Okay. Why don't I share what's happening, what are going to be the next steps and how they can communicate with us further. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. So to sum up, today we shared about the mayor's budget proposal, and unfortunately, time being what it is, we didn't have a lot of time to answer all of the questions, taking all of your feedback. So like what Councilmember 5 said, please email us. What are your specific requests, if you have any that you would like for us to consider? Any questions that you might have, any other feedback that you might have, feel free to email us. However, your next opportunity to talk with the full council and to get additional information about the mayor's budget proposal in a forum setting is at the May 26th special city council meeting, which starts at 9:30 a.m. I know it's during our work time, but it starts at 9:30 a.m. The city council is again going to hear a presentation on the mayor's budget proposal and ask more additional questions. It's your opportunity to also attend that and submit your questions for that. If you can't attend, which is understandable, some people can't take time off work. Again, submit your questions and your comments to city council via email. You have between now and May 26th, that's Wednesday, you got like 6 days. Email district3@oaklandca.gov to reach Councilmember 5, or email council@oaklandca.gov to talk to the whole city council and share your feedback and get some questions answered. Between now and June is when the council is going to present their budget proposal in response to the mayor's budget proposal. Again, the information that we shared today is coming from the mayor, and this is how she would like to see the money be spent. This is not something that Councilmember 5 or Councilmember Bass or Councilmember Bergayo have said that they want to have the money spent. That's going to come in June. So now's the time to really tell us, give us the feedback, attend other budget forums, share with all the different council members how you would like to see the money spent. And then in June, the council is going to present their counter proposal. And between June and June 30th is where the council and the mayor and the city administration, they're all going to kind of hash these things out together. And then the final budget will be passed on July 1st. So again, take the time, share with us, give us your feedback, let us know what you're thinking, and we can move forward in this budget process. I want to thank everyone that showed up today to hear our budget proposal, because you're doing a lot. You're being engaged and you're sharing and you're participating in the process, and that's super important. So we really appreciate you taking the time to do that tonight. I want to thank Kristen Schumacher for her time and sharing her presentation, Lillian and Christina from Housing and Community Development. There's so many acronyms, you guys. I'm just like, I want to thank them for taking the time out of their day to present to us. And everybody else, we really appreciate you. This is live, and so it will be on Carol's YouTube page, so you can rewatch it and you can share it with your friends and your family, because I know that they're really excited about the budget, so you can share it with them and review. And yeah, so thank you, everyone. Carol, closing?
Okay, listen, this is why I'm not necessarily a politician, because I'm just going to keep it real with y'all. I'm trying to do some transformative things. And the people who voted for me to put me in this office voted for me to do just that. That means in transformation, things have to change. And there are people and entities that want things to stay exactly as they are. And so you can understand that I'm going to be up against quite the resistance in order to make shift happen. And I am dedicated to continue to doing that, but I'm definitely taking incoming as a result. I'm trying to do things that haven't necessarily been done before. But if we continue on this path that we're on, it will mean the destruction for all of us. And I hate to sound hyperbolic, but that is the reality. I'm talking about lack of infrastructure for the environment and keeping our lake clean and our storm drains clean and our air and our water and the earth. I'm talking about things that truly keep people safe and nurture them from the ground up, like before and after school programs, Head Start, affordable housing. And when I'm talking about affordable housing, I don't mean 120% of AMI. I'm talking about for the people who are our frontline workers, who are nail technicians, who are security guards, who are disabled, who are seniors. Those are the people I'm talking about needing to care for. The people who have struggled to pay rent or pay their mortgage for the last year and need assistance. During the foreclosure crisis, after all of the individuals who were formerly homeowners or who were impacted by predatory loans had their actual lives just ripped from them, you know what happened? We figured out a way to bail out people, but they weren't everyday average working people. They were banks to the tunes of billions and billions of dollars. And what we just went through, what we're currently going through, requires a safety net with that level of care and bailout, not punishment, not timelines that say, well, you need to, if you're not over it by this day, then you're just out of luck. We've got to change systemically everything that we do. And we've got to care more. And if that makes me not a good politician, well, I don't want to be one. I'm not going to prioritize the billionaires over the people that are actually crying out in need of governmental support. Because when markets fail, as they have done and will continue to do, it is the responsibility of elected leaders to care for the residents of their cities. That's what I'm intending to do. That's what I will do with this budget process. Whoever likes it or doesn't like it, that is what I'm going to do. And that is what I will push my council colleagues and work with them to do as well. So I need you in this process. My dog is barking, so that means it's time to go. But if you have any other further questions, please, once again, email us at district3@oaklandca.gov. And I'll talk to y'all soon. Take care.